To the world, Tony Randall was the ultimate picture of predictable, clean-cut sophistication. For decades, millions of viewers welcomed him into their living rooms as the fastidious, germophobic Felix Unger on The Odd Couple. He was the quintessential Hollywood gentleman, intellectual, highly disciplined, and seemingly devoid of the scandals that routinely swallowed his contemporaries whole. But beneath that perfectly tailored exterior laid a carefully guarded secret. For 30 years, while the cameras rolled and the public cheered, Randall was quietly operating within a completely different reality. It was a private world hidden in plain sight, deliberately shielded from the ruthless glare of the Hollywood spotlight. What drove one of television's most beloved figures to split his existence in two? The answer does not lie in a traditional Hollywood scandal, but rather in a deeply psychological and emotional pact, one that he managed to keep entirely under wraps until the very end. The identity Tony Randall presented to the public was a masterpiece of order, precision, and high culture. Born Leonard Rosenberg in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he spent his early years painstakingly rebuilding himself from the ground up. He changed his name, refined his speech, and adopted the posture of a classic European intellectual. By the time he achieved global fame as Felix Unger on The Odd Couple, the public fully believed that the actor and the character were exactly the same person. He was seen as a man who simply could not tolerate chaos. In reality, this rigid public persona served a much deeper psychological purpose. It was a protective shield against a chaotic world. Hollywood during the mid-20th century was an unforgiving environment where a single public mistake could instantly erase a lifetime of hard work. Randall understood the machinery of fame better than most. He intentionally crafted an image so wholesome, reliable, and predictable that the media never thought to question what lay beneath the surface. He became a passionate advocate for the arts, loved the opera, and spoke with an eloquence that commanded respect. However, maintaining this flawless facade required immense mental energy. Psychologically, when an individual spends decades playing a hyperspecific character in public, the need for a private space where they can step out of that costume becomes overwhelming. While the world laughed at his on-screen anxieties, Randall was experiencing a quiet, internal exhaustion. He began to realize that his public success had trapped him inside a golden cage of expectations. To survive the pressure, he had to build a secondary existence, a quiet zone of safety that belonged entirely to him, far away from the demanding eyes of his audience. He became a master of compartmentalization, keeping his professional triumph strictly separated from his internal reality. Yet, as the years progressed, this separation grew from a simple preference for privacy into a full, complex second life. A quiet shift occurred behind closed doors, begging the question, what happens when the mask of perfection begins to crack, and a completely different man emerges in the dark? To truly understand the double life of Tony Randall, one must look at his first marriage to his high school sweetheart, Florence Gibbs. Married in 1938, their relationship lasted for over 50 years, a timeline that is almost miraculous by Hollywood standards. To the outside world, they were a beautiful symbol of stability and old-school loyalty. But behind the scenes, their partnership operated under a unique, unspoken agreement designed to protect a deeply painful reality. Florence was an intensely private woman who struggled with severe health issues, conditions that she and Randall decided would never be shared with the public. Randall took on the psychological role of her ultimate protector. In an era when the paparazzi were becoming increasingly aggressive, he knew that any glimpse of vulnerability would be exploited by the tabloids. To keep Florence safe, he constructed a massive wall between his career and his home life. He began attending high-profile industry events, movie premieres, and award shows entirely alone. This deliberate choice caused the media to form its own conclusions. Instead of looking for a hidden wife, journalists assumed Randall was simply a solitary eccentric who preferred his own company. Randall actively encouraged this misdirection. He allowed the world to view him as a professional bachelor at heart, using the public's assumptions as a smokescreen to guard his domestic reality. Every evening, he stepped off the glamorous set and returned to a quiet, isolated home environment where he acted as a dedicated caregiver. He managed two completely different identities, a vibrant, joke-cracking superstar by day, and a watchful, protective husband by night. The emotional cost of keeping these two worlds from colliding was massive, requiring constant mental alertness and a total sacrifice of his own social life outside of work. For 3 decades, this delicate balance worked with absolute precision. No one suspected the quiet reality waiting for him at home. But a sudden, devastating tragedy was about to shatter his carefully constructed system, leaving him entirely unmoored in a world he no longer recognized. In 1992, the long, silent struggle came to a heartbreaking end when Florence passed away from cancer. For the first time in his adult life, Tony Randall was truly alone. The loss plunged the 72-year-old actor into a profound psychological crisis. The private world he had spent more than half his life protecting was suddenly gone, leaving behind an agonizing, empty silence. The daily routines of caregiving and compartmentalization that had sustained his mind for decades no longer had a purpose. His close friends noticed an immediate and alarming change in his behavior. The sharp, energetic man who always had a witty comment appeared to be fading away into his grief. The Hollywood community quietly assumed that Randall would now retire from the public eye. He had wealth, immense fame, and a legendary legacy that secured his place in television history. It seemed natural for a man in his 70s to step back and live a quiet, reflective life as an elder statesman of the arts. But from a psychological standpoint, retirement felt like a death sentence to Randall. He could not tolerate the emptiness of an idle mind, nor did he want to be consumed by his sorrow. The intensity of his grief forced a massive internal shift. He began to realize that the rigid boundaries he had maintained to protect his past had also kept him isolated from experiencing new dimensions of life. He had spent decades playing defense against the world, guarding secrets and managing impressions. Now, with nothing left to hide, he faced a critical psychological crossroads. He could choose to remain a prisoner to his established public image, or he could do something so completely unexpected that it would shock everyone who thought they knew him. Just when it seemed his life story was drawing to a predictable, quiet close, an unexpected encounter sparked an internal transformation that no one saw coming, turning his final years into his most controversial chapter yet. At the age of 75, Tony Randall did something that left the public utterly speechless. He fell deeply in love with Heather Harlan, an aspiring young actress who was just 25 years old. The 50-year age difference was staggering. Randall was fully aware of human behavior and how society viewed such massive age gaps. In the mid-1990s, a relationship with this kind of dynamic was an instant target for cruel tabloid jokes, intense media scrutiny, and widespread public judgment. For a gentleman who had spent his entire existence preserving a dignified, flawless reputation, entering into this romance was an enormous psychological risk. It threatened to rewrite how the public remembered him. Yet, instead of hiding the relationship or keeping Heather in the shadows of another double life, Randall made a conscious decision to change his approach to fame. He refused to hide. In 1995, the couple married in a quiet, private ceremony officiated by the mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani. The public response was a mixture of shock and disbelief. This bold, romantic move did not fit the safe image of Felix Unger that audiences had cherished for decades. This decision marked the official beginning of Randall's true second life, a total personal reinvention that flew in the face of traditional aging and societal rules. Psychologically, Randall was experiencing a profound emotional rebirth. He was no longer the lonely figure protecting a painful past, he was a man aggressively claiming a second chance at joy. He stopped caring about the rigid expectations of the Hollywood elite and embraced a newfound freedom. However, this beautiful new chapter brought its own complex psychological challenges. Randall had to look into the mirror and directly confront his own advanced age and mortality, knowing that this new path would require him to navigate uncharted emotional territory. He had successfully proven that age was just a number when it came to finding love. But the biggest surprise of Randall's radical reinvention was still to come, raising the emotional stakes higher than he ever could have anticipated. The public astonishment reached an entirely new level when Tony Randall announced he was becoming a father for the very first time at the age of 78. Shortly after the birth of his son, Julia, his wife Heather gave birth to their second child, Jefferson, a year later. For 50 years, Randall had lived under the assumption that he would never experience parenthood, a conscious sacrifice he had made during his first marriage. Suddenly, in the twilight of his life, his quiet, orderly home was completely transformed by the loud, chaotic energy of infants and toddlers. This dramatic shift added a deeply complex layer to his ongoing experience with a double identity. To the outside world, Randall became a walking media headline. He was the subject of intense societal debates, late-night comedy monologues, and endless public curiosity. Critics openly questioned the ethics of a man choosing to bring children into the world when he was highly unlikely to see them reach adulthood. But inside the walls of his apartment, completely away from the media storm, Randall was experiencing a beautiful emotional awakening. He threw himself into the role of a father with the same intense discipline he had once used to protect his past secrets. He adjusted his schedule to wake up for late-night feedings, changed diapers, and spent hours playing on the living room floor. In doing so, he completely dropped the sophisticated, fastidious celebrity persona that had defined him for 50 years. He was living a double life of a completely different nature. He was a revered Hollywood icon to the public, and a gentle, hands-on, exhausted father to two young children who had absolutely no concept of their father's historic fame. This new life brought him a level of happiness he had never thought possible. Yet, casting a shadow over this beautiful family dynamic was a rapidly ticking clock, an undeniable physical reality that Randall had to face every single morning. Managing this late-life family required an incredible amount of physical and psychological energy. Tony Randall was deeply aware that his time with his young children was severely limited by biology. This sharp realization drove him into a state of hyper-discipline that surpassed anything he had done in his youth. To ensure he would stay alive, active, and present for as long as possible, he adopted an extraordinarily strict daily health regimen. He woke up at the crack of dawn every morning, maintained a rigorous exercise routine, and monitored his nutrition with scientific precision. He was fighting a quiet, desperate, and heroic battle against the natural process of aging. While the public saw a smiling, elegant older man enjoying his family in magazine features, the internal psychological tension Randall carried was immense. Every milestone his children reached, their first steps, their first words, was a bittersweet reminder that his own time was running out. To cope with this reality, Randall began using his creative skills to build a bridge to the future. He spent hours recording videotapes and writing detailed letters to his children. In these messages, he documented his life stories, his values, his philosophies, and his deep love for them. He wanted to ensure they would know exactly who he was, in his own words, long after he was gone. He was actively preparing his family for a future he knew he would not share, serving as both their present protector and a future memory. This hidden emotional burden was carried with absolute grace. He refused to let his anxieties about death cast a shadow over the joyful childhood of his son and daughter. Through sheer willpower and discipline, he managed to successfully outrun the clock for several beautiful, memory-filled years. But eventually, the human body reaches its limits, and Randall received a physical warning sign that could no longer be ignored. In May 2004, at the age of 84, Tony Randall's long, brave race against time finally came to an end. Following heart surgery, he developed a severe, prolonged respiratory illness that his body could no longer fight. He passed away quietly in his sleep at a hospital in New York. The news of his death triggered an immediate wave of grief from millions of fans worldwide who had spent decades watching him on their television screens. The public tributes focused heavily on his brilliant comedic timing, his dedication to the theater, and his iconic performance as Felix Unger. But behind those public standard tributes, the true depth and meaning of Randall's double life was finally fully understood by those who loved him most. The secret world he had carefully maintained for 30 years to protect his first wife, followed by the courageous, late-life reinvention of his second family, revealed a deeply complex human being. He was a man who flatly refused to let Hollywood, or society, dictate his personal happiness. He had successfully walked through the treacherous, shallow waters of fame without ever losing his core humanity, his integrity, or his profound commitment to the people he loved. His final decade was not spent looking backward at past trophies, but looking forward into the bright future of his young children. He left behind an incredible artistic legacy for the world to enjoy, but his greatest masterpiece was entirely private. It was a story of fierce protection, unconditional love, and radical reinvention. As we look back at the polished, neat image of the characters he played so beautifully, we are reminded of a powerful truth about human nature. The roles we play for the world are often just the surface. True legacy is found in the quiet, hidden choices we make to love and protect others when the cameras are turned off. If this look into the hidden life of an icon moved you, consider reflecting on the silent sacrifices made by those in your own life. Keep watching to discover more untold stories of the human heart behind the world's most famous faces.